The advice sounds like the most responsible thing a person can do. Get out of debt before anything else. Clear the slate. Start fresh. It is repeated in best-selling books, echoed across financial forums, and delivered with the confidence of someone who has seen it work. And in certain situations, it does work. But the version most people follow is not actually a debt strategy. It is a sequencing trap. And the difference between understanding that and not understanding it can cost years of financial progress that can never be recovered. Here is what the data shows and why it matters. The most widely circulated framework for paying off debt instructs people to list all their debts from smallest balance to largest, attack the smallest first, regardless of interest rate, and roll each freed-up payment into the next one. The logic is motivational. Small wins create momentum. Momentum creates persistence. Persistence eventually produces a debt-free outcome. There is genuine behavioral science behind this thinking, which is exactly why it sounds so convincing. But this advice was not designed to help people build wealth. It was designed to help people stay motivated through a process that the data shows many people abandon. The problem is not that the strategy lacks merit on its own terms. The problem is that for a large portion of the people following it, it is the wrong strategy applied at the wrong time, in an economic environment that has changed significantly since the framework became mainstream. The environment that matters most is interest rates. According to data from the Federal Reserve confirmed by LendingTree's consumer credit analysis, the average annual percentage rate on credit card accounts carrying a balance exceeded 22% by the end of 2025. That figure is not a temporary anomaly. Over the prior decade, the average assessed interest rate on revolving credit card debt increased by close to 60%. The debt that most households are carrying today is structurally more expensive than the debt the popular advice frameworks were built around. And yet the advice has not changed to reflect that reality. What does an interest rate above 22% actually mean in practical terms? Standard amortization calculations confirm that a balance of $7,000 at 22% interest, serviced with minimum payments only, would take more than 10 years to eliminate and would generate interest costs that approach or exceed the original balance itself, not interest on top of the principal. The interest alone potentially matching or surpassing what was originally borrowed. Every month that passes before this balance is targeted aggressively, that figure grows. The sequencing decision is not theoretical. It has a direct and compounding cost that accelerates with time. Now return to the popular advice. The small balance first approach directs all extra payment capacity toward the lowest balance regardless of interest rate. In a household carrying a small personal loan at 8% alongside a credit card balance at 22%, the advice says to clear the personal loan first. Meanwhile, the 22% balance continues accumulating interest at a rate that makes the behavioral motivation gains from eliminating the smaller balance financially irrelevant. The feeling of progress comes at a real and measurable cost. How significant is that cost? Research drawing on the Survey of Consumer Finances, cited in academic analyses of debt repayment behavior, found that households following a purely balance-based repayment sequence, rather than an interest rate-based approach, pay meaningfully more in total interest across the full course of their debt elimination journey. A 2022 study using that dataset estimated the premium at between 1.8 and 4.3% on average, with the penalty falling hardest on lower-income households who carry the widest spread between high-rate and low-rate debts and have the fewest resources to absorb the difference. That penalty has only grown larger as credit card rates have risen. In an environment where the spread between a 22% credit card and a 6% auto loan is 16 percentage points, the mathematical cost of ignoring that spread is not minor. Here is where it becomes genuinely complicated. The behavioral research that motivated the small balance first framework is legitimate. A 2012 study from researchers at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management found that consumers who eliminate individual debt accounts, regardless of their size, are statistically more likely to complete their overall debt elimination process. And findings published in the Harvard Business Review in 2016 reached a similar conclusion, identifying the proportion of a given balance eliminated rather than the absolute payment size as the strongest predictor of sustained motivation in debt repayment. Closing an account entirely, even a small one, produces a psychological signal of completion that keeps people committed over the months and years a full debt elimination typically requires. These findings are real. The small win effect is documented across multiple studies in consumer behavior and behavioral economics. That is not in dispute. But the research that underpins the popular framework was conducted when credit card interest rates were materially lower than today. The behavioral advantage of the small balance strategy has always come with a known mathematical cost. At narrower interest rate spreads, that cost could be reasonably dismissed. At the spreads that exist in today's credit environment, across dozens of markets globally where consumer lending rates have risen sharply since 2021, the cost has become difficult to justify for a large share of borrowers. The broader pattern is documented beyond a single country. Consumer finance regulators and central banks across multiple economies have recorded rising revolving credit costs for households throughout the same period. The interest rate environment that makes the popular debt advice most costly is not a localized condition. It is a global one. There is a second and deeper structural problem with the advice. The most common version instructs people to pay off all debt before investing. Every available dollar goes toward debt reduction until the balance reaches zero. Only then does any wealth-building activity begin. This sequencing feels intuitive. It feels disciplined. It feels like doing the right thing before allowing yourself something that feels more rewarding. But this instruction ignores the most asymmetric financial opportunity most employed people have access to, which is an employer-matched retirement contribution. When an employer matches retirement contributions, the match represents an immediate return of 50 to 100% on every dollar contributed, depending on the plan's matching formula. No credit card interest rate, however high, produces a guaranteed return of that magnitude in the opposite direction. Paying off a credit card at 22% interest is expensive to carry and valuable to eliminate. But an employer match returning 50 or 100% on the contributed dollar is categorically more valuable from a pure return standpoint. Choosing to delay capturing a 50% employer match in order to accelerate repayment of a 22% credit card is, by any standard financial calculation, a net negative decision. The return on the match exceeds the cost of the interest. Financial planning guidance published by institutions including Fidelity Investments identifies the employer match as the single highest priority financial move for most working households, placing it above accelerated debt repayment specifically because of this guaranteed immediate return. This is not an outlier position. It reflects a near consensus view among professional financial planners across multiple markets who work with household finances daily. And yet the popular debt-first advice either omits this consideration entirely or buries it beneath the primary directive to eliminate all debt before anything else. The practical reframe that the evidence supports is not complicated. Interest rate is the primary variable, not balance size. High-interest debt, which across most markets means revolving credit card balances charging 15% or above, functions as a compounding negative investment. Every dollar allocated to reducing it at 22% earns a guaranteed 22% return in reduced interest. Targeting it first, from the highest rate down, is the mathematically sound sequence. Simultaneously, capturing any available employer contribution match provides an immediate return that dominates virtually every other financial decision on the table. Both actions should happen in parallel. Low-rate debt, including mortgages taken at historically low rates, student loans issued below 7%, and auto financing in low single digits, can be serviced at minimum while capital flows toward assets that have historically produced returns above those rates over long holding periods. Time invested in compounding assets produces returns that cannot be retroactively earned. Years spent waiting for a low-rate debt to reach zero before beginning to invest are not neutral years. They are years of foregone compounding that no future contribution can fully replace. The sequencing matters more than most conversations about debt acknowledge. Not because eliminating debt is the wrong goal. Eliminating high-interest debt is one of the most valuable financial actions available to a household. But the order in which debts are addressed and the question of when investing begins relative to that process produces outcomes that diverge significantly over time. The popular advice resolves that question in a way that is easy to explain and motivationally accessible. It is not always the answer that produces the best financial outcome. The framework was built in a lower interest rate environment, grounded in behavioral research conducted before credit card rates reached today's levels, and structured primarily to solve a motivation problem rather than an optimization problem. On the motivation problem, it has genuine merit. On the optimization question, in today's rate environment, for households carrying high-rate balances alongside low-rate debts and employer match opportunities, it falls meaningfully short. For anyone who found this useful, passing it on is one of the simplest ways to give someone a head start that most people never receive. Content like this exists because people choose to support it. A like or a subscription is what keeps these ideas reaching the people who need them most. Here is where this ends. Paying off all debt first, in the order the popular advice prescribes, sounds like the most responsible financial decision a person can make. In certain situations, applied to the right balances in the right environment, it is. But as a universal rule, followed regardless of interest rate, regardless of employer match opportunities, and regardless of the compounding years lost by delaying investment, it is not the responsible choice. For a large share of households following it today, it is simply expensive. There is also a compounding time cost the popular advice does not quantify in its sequencing logic. Every year that investment is deferred in order to complete debt elimination, the window for early compound growth narrows permanently. Compound returns are most powerful in the earliest years of investment because those are the years with the most time remaining for growth to multiply. A household that spends 5 years clearing every debt before beginning to invest has lost 5 years of early compounding that cannot be rebuilt by increasing contributions later. Standard compound interest calculations confirm that $1 invested early in a working life has dramatically greater lifetime earning potential than the same dollar invested years later, even assuming identical annual returns. The sequencing decision is therefore not only about the cost of interest, it is also about the cost of time. And unlike interest, which can be paid down and eliminated, time cannot be recovered at any price.